Hello guys! At the end of the year, we often look back at the most important events. For me, in 2024, it is the fact that war has finally returned back home to Russia, where it belongs, where millions of people, together with the Kremlin goblin, wanted it so much. And now they have it. And not just in the regions that border front lines in Ukraine, but literally everywhere. If we have a look at the events of just this week, we can clearly see fires and explosions all over the Russian Federation. Starting from a scooter in Moscow near the Russian general, continuing with lots of fires on police stations and bank departments, and finishing with a precise strike on a military ammunition depot in Murmansk, which is near the Arctic. People in Kazan, Tatarstan, that actually tried to become independent in the 90s had to hide in the metro station, just as Ukrainians do on a daily basis. Putin wanted war, Putin got war. Now he cannot ignore these updates in the news and keeps repeating Oreshnik, Oreshnik, Oreshnik. This is his only argument that I am sure will stop working with the global leaders of the democratic world, same as it does not work with Ukrainians. Because the only way to end this war is to end the Putin's regime. My name is Anna, I'm from Ukraine, I'm in Ukraine, and if you want to see the defeat and demilitarization of Russia and also protect yourself against evil hybrid warfare, subscribe. We discuss all of that on the channel. And yes, my main conclusion of 2024 will be war is back home. It belongs to Russia. And this week illustrated that literally every region of this largest country in the world that definitely does not need more territories is super vulnerable. Russia is a bully that can attack smaller, much smaller countries, but cannot defend themselves. And we can clearly see that. Russia is an aggressor prepared to violate laws, cross borders, loot, but when it comes to the protection of their territories, of their objects, they fail. It is not just about Kursk under the control of Ukrainian armed forces. It is about the important military objects that we are able to reach with inexpensive Ukrainian drones, because you remember, we still have lots of limitations. So during this week, there was an epidemic of fires on Russian military objects. And it started with oil refineries that were burned in Oryol. Actually, it is the second time in approximately a week. They have a funny name for that oil refinery, the Steel Horse, and this Steel Horse burns just perfectly. There are lots of videos and reports, and most importantly, a conclusion. Even after the first attack, Russia cannot protect the object for the second time. And this is another problem for their oil refining industry, which suffered greatly since the start of 2024, because this is exactly the moment when we began using this strategy. Another important strike happened in Novocherkassk of Rostov region, and there Ukrainian armed forces neutralized a military warehouse. Why is it so important? Well, first of all, this means lots of Ukrainian lives saved, because you clearly understand that warehouses are the places where they store instruments of war, and by destroying these objects, we first protect Ukrainian lives, second, demilitarize Russia, and third, send a beautiful message to the population. No, not everything goes according to the plan of your pathetic Kremlin goblin, who had a very sick press conference this week, and I will connect a video about that where he actually illustrated total detachment from reality. And I think that we should not speak about negotiations or appeasement, but better concentrate on involuntary commitment of Putin, who is clearly not adequate. And it is also important that Russian economy is close to a serious collapse, something that reminds us of the 90s. And many people react to that with typical violent Russian behavior by burning ATMs, bank departments, and police stations. Perhaps they are not able to pay their debts, they are not able to feed their families, they cannot protest like people in the democratic world do, so they set on fire these evil objects in Moscow, in Tver, in Krasnoyarsk, more than 15 cases in just 2 days. Subscribe to see Russia on fire and the liberation of so many nations that actually are now under pressure, under serious pressure inside the Russian Federation. And share these videos on your social media platforms. When I say about these beautiful hidden nations inside the Russian Federation, I also mean people of Tatarstan. Their city Kazan was targeted by Ukrainian drones this week. And there are lots of important military objects that Russia decided to locate in this republic, like a gunpowder plant, a drone assembly, military airfield. And during the recent drone attack, people had to hide in the underground. I was actually surprised to know that they have an underground in Kazan. But there are photos and they remind me like days in Kyiv, because literally whenever I travel to Kyiv, I spend some time in the underground, not traveling, but hiding from Russian drones, from Russian missiles. Tatarstan is a very vivid illustration why nations that want to get out of the Soviet prison should have this chance. Back in 90s, they proclaimed independence and people voted for independence. They did not want to be a part of the Russian Federation. But that was very quickly suppressed, and Putin worked hard to eliminate all the connections with that nice period of the Tatarstan culture and modern history. And he made them rename the position of the president of the country. He also banned various elements that were written in the constitution, and even banned them using Latin alphabet, just the Cyrillic, which is not good for Tatar language, and Tatarstan is inhabited by Tatars mainly. And right now, he uses this territory as one of his military regions where there are lots of drone plants, lots of various military plants, military airfields, and so on. So people who actually did not want to be a part of the Russian Federation now suffer from the attacks on Russian Federation, for what Russian Federation does. And this is what waits all of the countries and territories who can become a part of Russia, who think it's like normal. No, Russia not only destroys the cultural identity, studying Tatar language is prohibited, Russian is dominant, and at the same time, you also suffer for the sins of Russia. Recently, I have discovered very beautiful resources on Instagram and X that tell the story of the hidden nations of Russia. And I will connect these links, and if you're interested to discover how many beautiful peoples actually are now hidden in Russia, are not able to practice their cultural linguistic rights, subscribe to these pages. And let me know in the comments below, would you like to know more about the hidden nations of this Russian Federation that after the collapse of the Kremlin regime can actually become independent? And my dear friends, you don't have to be afraid of this process, because they will not be that sick and crazy as Putin. It is part of Russian narrative to frighten you with the potential liberation of these people, when in reality it's not a problem but actually a solution. And subscribe to witness that together, because I am personally convinced that safety and security in this part of the world is only possible after the collapse of Kremlin imperial project. And Ukrainian drones reached Murmansk. Murmansk is a city really far away from our borders, more than 2,000 kilometers, and it is close to the Arctic. It is considered the Arctic city. And of course, it is full of various military objects, starting with an air base and finishing with ammunition depots. But most importantly, near Murmansk, they have a central base for Russia North Fleet. And they often use this fleet to provoke NATO countries that are also present in the Arctic. So here is where I want to remind you that by demilitarizing Russian military objects in the Arctic, we actually support NATO countries who suffer from their actions in this beautiful part of the world. And I think that's a good investment for the future of NATO and most importantly for the future of Ukraine in NATO. And these are just a few cases that I have enumerated. A Russian general neutralized with a scooter in a beautiful, worth a separate James Bond movie case. And this was not just an ordinary Russian general. This was the head of Russian nuclear, chemical, and biological defense forces. In Russia, defense forces are always attack forces. And this person was one of the very active Russian BS spreaders. He was often talking about modified fighter mosquitoes and biolabs in Ukraine. Somehow they did not manage to find these biolabs, surprisingly, with all the efforts. Occupying these territories, looking for something, they did not manage. And if there were biolaboratories, I wonder why didn't we use these mosquitoes on Russian invaders? That would be such an easy solution. And he was also responsible for a number of war crimes as the head of these forces, chemical forces, because Russia is guilty for the usage of chemical weapons on the front lines in Ukraine and also in Syria. So let's just have a look at the events of this week. Russian general neutralized in Moscow. That's the second case during this month, because previously there was also a missile developer neutralized in a forest next to Moscow. There are explosions in Murmansk, in Kazan, in Novocherkassk, in Oryol on oil refinery. And Russians also help us to some extent by smoking near their ATMs, near their police stations and bank departments. 15 cases in this recent 2 days. And this is no ordinary thing. This is actually an illustration of the collapsing Russian economy and serious troubles that they have. Those who try to persuade you that Russia is a strong country, ask them, if Russia is so strong, why do you have to pay 100 rubles for just $1? If Russia is so strong, why its GDP is twice smaller than that of an individual US state, Texas? Did you know that Russia could comprise 25 Texas states, but its GDP is 2 times smaller with all the natural resources of Russia? Just think about that. So these are just a few arguments that clearly illustrate that Russia is weak, and our task is to defeat and demilitarize this empire, because it is in the past. Empires are in the past, and no monster will survive in the 21st century. And we are working on that, defending not just Ukraine, but the values of the freedom-loving world. Please join me on Instagram. I share more of everyday life there. Follow me on X. I'm fighting there and sharing some videos with some strong words. Our Blue Sky community is growing quickly, Threads and Discord. Check our merch shop for lots of good items that work well as reminders and conversation starters about Ukraine. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons and sponsors of the channel. But most importantly, thank you for standing with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!